Professional baseball in America was notably unsettled around the turn of the 20th century as multiple competing professional leagues rose and fell. Much of what we understand to be how Major League Baseball works today really started in 1903 when the National League and the American League started playing the World Series. But there was a notably confusing period when the American League was trying to move to Major League status that resulted in a bizarre situation in Baltimore where two armed camps fought a war for control of a baseball field. The February 1900 battle for the control of the nearly forgotten Baltimore Union Field is a story that is so strange that you wouldn't believe it if it hadn't actually happened. There's still dispute over the exact origin of baseball, but there is a general agreement that the first time that rules were codified that resembled the modern game were by the New York Knickerbocker Club in 1845. Thus, baseball was still a fairly young sport when, in 1869, the Cincinnati Red Stockings became the first baseball club to be openly all professional. Every member of the team was paid to play. Not surprisingly, the first professional league formed shortly thereafter. The National Association of Professional Baseball Players was formed in 1871 and is largely considered to be the first professional league. In fact, one of the first professional sports leagues of any kind. It was formed out of a schism between amateur players and the growing number of professionals. The NABBP lasted for 5 seasons, from 1871 through the 1875 season. But the league faced many issues and eventually folded, with many teams going to a newly formed National League of Professional Baseball Clubs that had more central authority. Originally, there were 8 charter member clubs, although the teams would change with time. But the National League was not without competition, and in 1883 a competitor arrived. The American Association of Baseball Clubs was formed to combat the rather stricter rules of the National League. Dr. Robert Shipley of Rutgers University explained in a 1995 publication of the Society for American Baseball Research. Formed largely through the aggressive planning and capital of 4 large brewers, the American Association survived and occasionally prospered by marketing itself with 25-cent seats, Sunday baseball, and the sale of beer. The Double A gained enough credibility between 1884 and 1890 that they played a championship series with the National League, an early predecessor to the World Series. Among the new AA teams was Baltimore, the Baltimore Baseball and Exhibition Company, better known as the Orioles, owned by brewery mogul Harry Vanderhorst. The Orioles would have a wild ride through the early innings of professional baseball history, but in the AA they simply weren't very good. Author David B. Stimson explains, unlike the National League, however, the American Association permitted its franchises to sell beer at their home games. Harry Vanderhorst installed a beer garden in his ballpark and encouraged fans to remain even after the game had ended to consume more beer. Although the American Association Orioles, they were the first professional Baltimore baseball team to be known as the Orioles, never placed higher than third during their decade in existence, the sale of beer at the games proved quite profitable. The league operated until 1891, but conflict within the league and team defections to the National League finally brought its demise. 4 of the remaining AA teams were then folded into the National League, and among them were the Orioles. For the 1892 season, Vonderhorst hired Ned Hanlon as the team manager, giving him a stake in the team. Hanlon had been a standout outfielder and shortstop with the Cleveland Blues and the Detroit Wolverines. After the Wolverines folded in 1888, his contract was sold to the Pittsburgh Alleghenies, a former AA team that had skipped to the National League. Hanlon's somewhat questionable midnight signing of a player from Philadelphia is purportedly the event that led to the Pittsburgh team gaining the nickname Pirates. Because don't all good stories involve pirates? During their championship time, the team played at Union Field. Mike Kingeman of Baltimore Sun explains, Union Park, home of the celebrated 19th century Orioles, went up in 17 days at a cost of $7,500. In less than 3 weeks, workers turned a hilly pasture with trees and a stream into a big league diamond, complete with beer garden, picnic grounds, and a ladies' grandstand. The Society for American Baseball Research explains that at the time it was built, Union Park was the largest ballpark in the American Association and the first in Baltimore to have a double-decked grandstand. There for 9 years, the Orioles would strut their stuff, the likes of which baseball had never seen. The 8,000-seat Union Park Stadium sat on 25th Street between Guilford Avenue and Barclay Street. The play there, Kingeman explains, included some of the antics of the time. At Union Park, the Orioles weren't averse to doctoring the baselines to favor their bunts. In the outfield, they hit extra balls in the grass should a base hit bound past them, and they sprinkled soap flakes on the mound, which stuck to the hands of opposing pitchers and messed with their control. Sports writer Hugh Fullerton claimed that Union Park was the most unfair grounds ever constructed. It took some time. The Orioles finished last in the league in 1892 and eighth in 1893, but Hanlon put together a team of all-stars. 6 players from the team: Wilbert Robinson, Dan Brothers, Huey Jennings, John McGraw, Wee Willie Keeler, and Joe Kelly, as well as Hanlon himself, would eventually be inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame. The Orioles won 3 consecutive pennants in 1894, 95, and 96, and followed up with 2 second-place finishes. Hanlon became known as Foxy Ned and pioneered plays such as the squeeze play and the sacrifice bunt. The team was a powerhouse, but the capriciousness of leagues in early baseball was already setting them up for a conflict. The team's success and attendance dropped off significantly in 1898, and Vonderhorst, assuming that the winning team was losing steam, engineered a merger with the Brooklyn Bridegrooms, putting the two teams under the same ownership, and that allowed them to take the best talent from both teams, and it was able to move Hanlon to Brooklyn in 1899. There, Hanlon was the cause of another nickname change. The press coined the team the Superbas, the name of a former New York vaudeville act performed by 2 apparently unrelated brothers named Hanlon. The team wouldn't formally use the nickname Trolley Dodgers until 1916. The Superbas won the National League pennant in 1899 and 1900. But John McGraw and Wilbert Robertson had been left behind, by some accounts refusing to move as they had financial interests in Baltimore. With McGraw as player manager, the Orioles exceeded expectations and finished a respectable fourth in 1899. They might have won the pennant had McGraw not had to take a month off in August owing to the illness of his wife. The Society for American Baseball Research writes that Hanlon himself called the 1899 Orioles the surprise of the season. His Brooklyn team, of course, won the pennant. But the National League was struggling. An expansion to 12 teams after the collapse of the AA had diluted the player base, and several teams were struggling financially. The league decided to contract back to 8 teams. And despite their success, Baltimore was one of the teams eliminated. But McGraw didn't want to give up on Baltimore baseball. There was talk of reviving the American Association, and the new association targeted cities that had been abandoned by the National League, and McGraw planned for his Orioles to be one of the 8 teams in the new league. Moreover, he found out that Hanlon and Vonderhorst had made a mistake. They had allowed their lease to expire on Union Ballpark. Having gotten financial backing for the new team, McGraw snapped up the lease. The Sun wrote, "Manager John J. McGraw, Baltimore's American Association baseball team, scored yesterday what is probably the greatest coup that has yet been made by the association when he secured the Union Park grounds for his team." The Sun was, of course, happy with the deal, which they saw as guaranteeing a professional baseball would continue in Baltimore. The significance of the acquisition cannot be overstated, they opined. It proves that the talk about an association team in this city is founded on facts and money. Notably, the Sun wrote, a remarkable feature about the deal is that the stands, clubhouse, etc. on the grounds are expected to go to the new lessees. Mr. Hanlon and the other owners of the league team have no right to the improvements that they have made. But Hanlon didn't agree on that point, and that would lead to one of the strangest moments in baseball history. While the lease was for the park and facilities, Hanlon and Vonderhorst objected, as the stands, clubhouse, and other improvements had been made and paid for by Vonderhorst's exhibition company. McGraw and company got a court injunction to keep Hanlon and Vanderhorst from removing or destroying any of the fixtures at Union Park. Angered, Hanlon hired armed guards to keep McGraw and his people from entering the field and plastered the fence with no trespassing signs. The situation was serious. The Chicago Inter-Ocean reported, "War for possession of Union Park by the association forces began in earnest today. President Peterson and Attorney Sams went to the grounds in person this morning and demanded entrance. They were met by a force of 5 men, fully armed, who refused to open the door. Other men, also armed, were seen patrolling the stands and fences. The force is about a dozen, said to be desperate men, and Hanlon says that they have orders to shoot anyone trying to enter." Peterson, president of the new association team, the report says he has secured the backing of the police board and expects to bombard the fortress. The two camps seemed braced for all-out war. What happened next is somewhat disputed. By one account, on February 3rd, 1900, some of McGraw's players scaled the fence and a brawl started between the McGraw people and the Hanlon people that was eventually stopped by police. The Inter-Ocean wrote, Peterson leapt on the little house on which the umpire dresses, but was immediately confronted by Reddy, the groundkeeper. As a struggle ensued, each tried to throw the other off. They were on even terms when Deputy Marshal Farman came on the scene and separated the combatants. By another account, Philip Peterson, secretary of the American Association team, climbed the fence, pummeled one of the guards, and left in his pocket the court order that kept Hanlon from removing any property from the grounds. In any case, the stadium was now occupied. The Inter-Ocean wrote, the rest of the Peterson crowd had reached the top of the house and leapt onto the grounds. They ran for third base, McGraw's corner, and there pitched their camp. The Hanlon forces took possession of first base. The stadium now disputed, the Society for American Baseball Research explains. McGraw's men, carrying guns and clubs, set up camp at third base. On the other side of the diamond, Hanlon's men set up shop at first base. A single police officer took his post in front of the ticket office. The two literally camped on the field while the argument over ownership went to the courts. The New York Times described this strange situation. All last night and throughout today until a heavy rainstorm this evening drove them to shelter, the opposing baseball forces occupied the disputed grounds at Union Park, and the campfire burned brightly on either side of the diamond. A squad of policemen patrolled the grounds, and more of the bluecoats guarded the entrance to prevent any further invasion and keep the crowd of rooters and curious people inside. The Baltimore populace, the Times writes, were evenly divided, but at times McGraw and the association people were lightly cheered. Referring to the ongoing conflict in South Africa, the Times wrote, the opposing forces were likened to the Boers and the British, the association people being called the Burghers. The Times noted that the opposing forces were not made up of the players themselves, but groundskeepers and other employees. The league men have possession of the clubhouse and grandstand and the main defenses, while McGraw's little army holds the right field. The general assumption of the Times, though, on February 4th, was that McGraw's claim would prevail, as the property owners, sympathetic to McGraw, indicated that the lease was duly executed. But just a day later, the Boston Globe reported, however, that the factions claiming the baseball grounds at Baltimore were tired of camping. Still, the camps were still there on February 6th, when the Chicago Inter-Ocean reported that the only change in the situation at Union Park today was the withdrawal of the policemen from the inside of the park by order of the park board. An inquiry was made by it into the status of the case, and it was said that the police had either done too much or had not done enough on Saturday afternoon. But the courts were not really required, as shifting leagues had created the situation, so they resolved it, or rather made it irrelevant. David Hill of Fox Sports explains, in the end, this battle was for naught. After the Philadelphia franchise was unable to find grounds for a stadium and backed out, the eighth team, Providence, also left the association. The association was forced to call off its league, leaving Baltimore without a franchise that year. McGraw and Robinson played that year for St. Louis, and Baltimore was without a professional team for the first time since 1883. The issue of the field was settled, with Hamlin keeping the lease and paying the former association the cost of 1 year's lease, $3,500, and the Society for American Baseball Research explains, $1,500 to $2,000, which purportedly represented the expense incurred by the amusement company to establish a team in Baltimore. Before leaving, the Society writes, they made a final curtain call at Union Park in a game between the Baltimore newspapermen and the cast of the musical Broadway of Tokyo. In what was dubbed a horrible game of baseball, the Robinson-led actors prevailed in a painful score of 19-0 over McGraw's newspapermen. But McGraw had not abandoned Baltimore. In 1901, the former minor league Western Association announced yet another competitor for the National League, an upstart American League, and McGraw acquired the rights to a team in Baltimore. McGraw, however, felt that the team needed a new stadium, as the lease for Union Field was set to expire. The new American League Orioles lasted just 2 years before folding. In 1903, the National and American Leagues agreed to a truce and to try to coexist, and the National League allowed for an American League team in New York to play alongside the Giants. The Orioles were sold to New York. That team would become the New York Yankees. Union Ballpark still hosted local and college games, and for a while Hanlon hoped to lease it again in hopes of bringing an American League team, or maybe an association team, as there was talk of reviving the American Association to compete with the American League, but neither materialized. It isn't clear exactly when the park was torn down, but by 1905 the grounds had been replaced by houses. Hill writes, today the grounds are home to apartment buildings and a parking lot, an ignoble fate for a former baseball stadium, and one that housed some of the more legendary players of its time. While there was a minor league team that used the name, the Orioles didn't return for Major League Baseball in Baltimore until 1954. That team had been a founding member of the American League as the Milwaukee Brewers in 1901. They'd been sold to St. Louis, where they played as the Browns for 52 years before being sold to a group of Baltimore investors. The strange invasion and occupation of Baltimore's Union Park is, well, one of the odder events in the history of the sport, but it also overshadows the memory of the long demolished baseball venue. Of 599 games that were played at Union Park, the Orioles won an astounding 413 to losses of just 186, a win rate of .680. Perhaps the field was worth fighting over, after all. I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends. And if you also believe that history deserves to be remembered, then you can support The History Guy as a member on YouTube, a supporter on our community at Locals, or as a patron on Patreon. You can also check out our great merchandise shop or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo.